From the KDLM studios in Detroit Lakes, it's Hodgepodge with Carol McCarthy, presented by Partnership for Health and now airing on TV3.
Today on Hodgepodge, we're going to talk about advanced care planning. And in the studio with me this morning from the Hospice of the Red River Valley, I've got Sue Sorensen and Roxanne Smedsrud. And welcome to Hodgepodge.
Thank you, Carol.
All right. So this is also known as a healthcare directive. So I want Sue, are you going to go first and tell us a little bit about who needs to be concerned about advanced care planning?
Sure. Anyone over 18 years of age should have a healthcare directive. And the big thing that we really want to stress today is talk about your healthcare wishes. You know, so many people, it's funny to me, they'll maybe be in their 50s and they'll say, oh, I really think my parents should have a healthcare directive, but they just won't write one. And then I'll say to them, well, do you have a healthcare directive? And they'll say, well, no, I don't. So really, anyone over 18 years old should have a healthcare directive.
All right. And so why is it important, I mean, for somebody who maybe is considered super healthy and, young, 18, why is it important and what are the advantages to you and your loved ones? I guess it's mostly for your loved ones if something should happen.
Someone said to me a while ago, the best gift her husband ever gave her was writing an advance directive. He had a heart attack suddenly. She said he was very healthy, had a heart attack. And she said there's no way she could have made some of the hard decisions she had to make for him if he didn't have it in writing.
Right. Well, and of course, if you have a large family or, a large family or an extended family, maybe you don't have any siblings, but maybe there's other people involved. But, when you get a lot of people involved trying to make those decisions, it gets a little bit hairy.
That's a great point, Carol. Often I think when people do write an advance directive and they list someone as an agent or a proxy, same thing, they either don't even talk to that person that they list as their agent, or if they do, they maybe talk to that one person. Let's say they're naming a child of theirs. It's so important for them to remember to talk to all of their kids, so they're all on the same page.
Right. So maybe, and then how do people get into this chat? I mean, maybe it's not right away, like you're listening to this and then all of a sudden say, okay, let's sit down and write a healthcare directive. Maybe you should just start talking about your health first.
Perfect. Yep. I've had people say to me at every Thanksgiving when their family comes home, they just sit down and say, you know what, let's talk about our healthcare directives, which sounds funny, but she said that has just really worked for their family. And now it's not only her generation, which she's in her 80s, she said it's our kids and our grandkids. And she said, we're so comfortable having that conversation. And she said the first time we had it, it was difficult, but each year it just seems to get easier. Because like you said earlier, Carol, often people will think too, I'm healthy, there's no reason for me to have a directive. But we never know when that's going to change. And much easier to have these conversations when you are healthy than, if there's an emergency situation and you have to make decisions immediately.
All right. I'm in the studio this morning with Sue Sorensen and Roxanne Smedsrud from Hospice of the Red River Valley. They're sharing information on advanced care planning, talking about what you need to do if something should happen to you and your relatives, your family, your spouse is left to make some key decisions in how the rest of your health care is going to advance. So what does advanced planning entail? I mean, do you have to have it in writing? Is it a legal document? Is it, I don't know. What does it mean to have a plan?
I think that's one of the difficult pieces that people also question. And actually, an advance directive is something you can print off, go online, find a form for advance directives. Can be printed off. It really only needs to be signed by two witnesses. Okay. So it does not need to be, you do not need to involve an attorney if that's not what you want. You certainly can go that route. But the easiest way is really, there's a short form. It's 2 pages. You can print it off, talk to your family about it, and get those witnesses to sign it.
Okay, yeah. So it's easier to follow a form once you sit down and make the goal to get this done. It is better to follow a form. So where would you get the form? You said to print it out.
One of the best websites that we have found is www.honoringchoices.org.
Okay.
And then you can go on there and pick each state, depending on what state you're from, and which would be the appropriate one for that state.
Okay, so different states vary on the legality of it, I guess?
They do.
Okay.
Yes, they do.
Okay,
so
good to know.
it's just, it can be very little that it's varying, and oftentimes it can be a bigger piece, but you want to get the one that's specific to the state you live in.
All right, some good information this morning on Hodgepodge about advanced care planning. And we're in the studio with Sue Sorensen and Roxanne Smedsrud from the Hospice of the Red River Valley. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about what is a surrogate or a health care agent, and a few more details. Maybe even a talk about a living will next on Hodgepodge.
Now, back to Hodgepodge with Carol McCarthy on KDLM Detroit Lakes.
Welcome back to Hodgepodge this Thursday morning, 16th of May, 2019. Carol McCarthy in the studio this morning with Sue Sorensen and Roxanne Smedsrud from Hospice of the Red River Valley. And we're talking about advanced care planning. And that is coming up with a healthcare directive. Ages 18 and older is what we learned in the first half, and also learned about having the talk with folks around you who would be your designated agent or not agent, but somebody who would make those decisions when you cannot. But we also talked about sitting down and having witnesses watch you fill out the directive or sign it, and it's a kind of a state-by-state planning. But let's talk a little bit about what a surrogate or a healthcare agent is in case the situation comes to pass. Dealing with the senior population, I'm sure you run into this quite often in your line of work in hospice. So tell us a little bit more about what a surrogate or a healthcare agent is, or who that would be.
Okay, healthcare agent is often people will have a child of theirs, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be someone that you've had the discussion with, and they know what your wishes are, and they would be able to follow through with your wishes.
Okay.
Because often, people will list someone as, a proxy, an agent. They're all the same thing. There's so many different terms for the same thing. But the important thing is talk to the person prior to listing them as your agent. And also not only them, but your entire family, have that discussion. Because I think it puts a lot of extra stress on that agent. If the siblings don't know your wishes and then something happens and that agent has to make decisions and their siblings are saying, well, I really don't think that's what mom intended. But if they've had that discussion all at the same time, all being, together, I just think it's so much better.
So how is this different from like a DNR, a do not resuscitate? Is that part of the plan?
That is part of the plan.
Okay.
Yep. So with an advance, a healthcare directive, a portion of it is naming someone as your proxy or your agent. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of it is, writing your specific things regarding, feeding tubes and CPR and those types of things.
Okay. So what is, sometimes we hear about a living will. What is a living will? Is that similar to the plan?
A living will is very similar to an advance directive. The thing about a living will is, though, you do not name, that agent is not named, or that power of attorney.
Okay.
So many times people misunderstand that. If I have my living will, I have it all completed. But they do also need to have that agent listed.
Okay. All right. Well, in the case too, say, mom and dad, or say a sibling, you're out visiting, you're with somebody overseas, or you're traveling, or something happens and you're not with the person you designated as your agent or your surrogate, and they have to make this decision because they're there, because they're far away from the agent or the surrogate. I mean, that's essentially what this piece of paper does too.
It does. Sometimes Sue and I were talking about this on the way over. It can get a little picky or a little touchy as far as if you are with someone that is not that agent. I think everyone's hope would be, though, that those conversations have been had. And so that person that's traveling with you does know what you want. And there would be communication between that person and your agent wherever they're located also.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in this day and age of smartphones and everything electronic, is there a way that you can have access to it anywhere?
Very true. I mean, it could be emailed, faxed, whatever, to wherever that location is, wherever that individual is.
Okay, so where would you keep something like this?
Well, number one, not in your safety deposit box at the bank. You want to have it out there. You want to have it at your wherever you go as far as a hospital, clinic area. You would also want to be sure that your family members had it. Specifically, your agent should have a copy of it, but sharing it with the rest of your family too will also be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Do a lot of places, like if you say went into like an assisted care place, or even with hospice, do you require that be in place, or is that something that legally that organizations or housing units can require?
It's not legally.
Okay.
I think anywhere you go anymore, that question is always asked. You go into the clinic and you're asked, do you have your advance directive completed? People be admitting to nursing homes, assisted living. That is the number one or upfront question that is asked. And then if it isn't there, can we help you complete that? Is that something you're interested in doing? I really think the more that people hear the word advance directive, the more we talk about our wishes, end of life, the easier it gets. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those subjects that initially is hard to bring up, but the more that conversation is there, the more open people are about it. It does become easier as you go.
All right, Roxanne Smedsrud and Sue Sorensen from Hospice of the Red River Valley talking about advanced care planning this morning on Hodgepodge and some of the other things too. So once you do this, is this something that's set in stone? I mean, is this something that you cannot ever change once you have everybody in place? I mean, it takes a lot to get through, initially, but if you have a change of mind, something happens, like maybe you sit down with your spouse is still alive, a spouse dies, and then things may change the course of, what you want to happen.
Mm-hmm. Great question, Carol. You can change it at any time. And also they say you should review it. If there's if you're divorced, or if there's a death in the family, or you have a new diagnosis, or your health declines. And they also say every 10 years you should review it. But personally, I really think you should review it yearly. I've seen many cases where, I'll ask someone if they have a healthcare directive, and they'll say, I think so. I think the person that I named as my proxy, I'm not sure who it was, but I'm not even sure they're living anymore. And I'm not even sure where I have a copy of it. So it's just so important for people to review it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Some good advice. Talking to folks from the Hospice of the Red River Valley, Sue Sorensen. And also we have Roxanne Smedsrud in the studio this morning. If you have a power of attorney, do you need an advance directive?
Great question. A lot of people think if you have a power of attorney that covers you for financial and medical, and it doesn't.
Okay.
You need to have a power of attorney for financial and a power of attorney or a healthcare directive, some type of advance directive for medical.
Okay. All right. And sometimes I hear pulsed, the word pulsed. I know when my parents were alive, people were talking about this pulsed. I'm like, oh yeah. And then I would go and Google it. What is pulsed?
So pulsed is used more for people that are declining and they're expected to live maybe a year or less. It stands for physician ordered life-sustaining treatment.
Okay.
So it is actually an order and needs to be signed by the physician. It's very specific as far as do you want the CPR, the feedings, IVs, what do you want at end of life? So it gives that a very encompassing look at what that individual does want at end of life.
So that is something that is included in your advanced care directive? Or again, that's something that, something your end of life is imminent and that's something you would need to do?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. It's not something that would be part of your original advanced directive. It's more or less when people are declining, when they're looking at that end of life time frame, that is usually completed.
All right. And is that different from a do not resuscitate?
It is,
directive?
because there's a lot more information on it. Like I said, do you want CPR? Do you want the feedings? Do you want IVs? Very specific as far as what you want to happen at that time in your life.
All right. So is this something, that we're listening to this today, but is this something that, like a healthcare provider or say somebody in a nursing home or maybe somebody from hospice would initiate that conversation? Because a lot of things are happening at that time and people won't pull pulse out of the air and say, I need to do a pulse. But is this something that somebody may suggest?
Yep. When you go into a nursing home, usually they will bring that up, if not always.
Right.
More recently. But they'll also ask you if you do have an advanced directive, because they want a copy of that too. Because with the pulse, you don't have an agent listed in that. So sometimes people will think, well, if I have a pulse, do I need an advanced directive? Yes, they really should have an advanced directive. But hopefully by the time they're asked to sign a pulse, they've already done an advanced directive.
Okay. All right. Some good information this morning. Lots of information this morning with Sue Sorensen and Roxanne Smedzard from Hospice of the Red River Valley. We're talking about advanced care planning, something that people over age 18 and older should sit down and do and, talk it out with. It's easier to do with people, although you could go through it alone as well. But again, you do need to have people involved in this. So where is a good spot? Where is a good resource to get all this information? Maybe refresh people's memory for what we've been talking about, maybe some of these questions, frequently asked questions as well, and the directive form.
There is great information on the website, www.honoringchoices.org, and also at the clinics, at the hospital, nursing homes, hospice, library. There are, so many different options, and there's so many different types of forms too. Even through Honoring Choices for healthcare directives, there's a short form and there's a long form. The short form is 2 pages long. The long form is 9 pages long. Ooh. So sometimes I think people see that long form and it's just overwhelming. Even if they can start with the short form and they can always add to that short form or complete a long form too once they get more comfortable with it.
Okay. All right. So some good information today, and it's maybe a good thing to do as a buddy system. Have you and a friend, or you and a couple friends, take care of this. Get the form, and then go through it and talk to your family. Have them included in this. So, what are some misconceptions about advanced planning? Off the top of your head,
that is a great question too. I would say one is that people think once they write one, they can't change it, and that is not correct. Roxanne, can you think of anything else? I recently was with my mother-in-law, and she had about 8 of her friends with her, and we started talking about advanced care planning. And, often, I guess we think that we as if we're in our 50s, we think our parents don't want to talk about it. But when I was with that group of women, it was about half and half. Half of them said they have tried talking to their kids about advanced care planning, and their kids have said, Mom, I don't want to talk about that. I just makes me nervous. It makes me uncomfortable. And then the other half said, oh, my daughter wants me to fill out this advanced directive, but I don't want to do it. So I just think people have to remember it truly is a gift that you're giving one another when you have an advanced directive.
All right. Sue Sorensen from Hospice of the Red River Valley and Roxanne Smedsrud from Hospice of the Red River Valley in the studio with me this morning talking about advanced care planning and something that hopefully this conversation we've had this morning will help you along in that process and start planning today. And we've got a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to switch gears a little bit. Do you have any other events coming up with hospice? I know that you work with the Memory Cafe.
Yep. And one thing I wanted to mention too with the advanced care planning, people really should, share it with their providers too.
Okay.
Take it to the clinic, share it with your provider, talk to the provider about it, and make sure they have it, a copy at the clinic, a copy at the hospital, like Roxanne said, copy with your agents, other family members.
And that's a good idea. And make sure when you go to your checkup that they have it still, because sometimes
Excellent.
things get misplaced.
That's
and
exactly
if
right.
If you give it to them and somehow it's like, oh, we never got one from you.
Yes.
Just make sure you check in, like you said.
Yes.
Occasionally.
And a lot of people, I tell them to have a folder in your house. So if you end up in the hospital, you can tell, your family member, it's at the house, it's, in this cupboard. Because it seems like a lot of people can find it when they need it.
Right.
So, one thing I wanted to mention too is the Memory Cafe. We meet the second Thursday of each month. Our next meeting will be June 13th from 3 to 4:30 at Community Alliance. And again, that's for people with mild to moderate memory loss. We've had our first meeting this month, and it was great. And so we're anxious for our next meeting.
All right. Yes, you had a few cancellations due to the weather. So.
We had two. You're right.
So it's finally good that you've had the first Memory Cafe. So some good information today on Hodgepodge from Hospice of the Red River Valley, Sue Sorensen and Roxanne Smedsrud. And thank you so much for coming in today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we check in with hospice every month, so tune in. And it's typically the third Thursday of the month right here in Hodgepodge. And that's it for me today. I'm Carol McCarthy, KDLM Hodgepodge.